You know that moment when someone's audacity is so staggering you almost have to admire it, almost. I was floating in my pool on a Saturday afternoon, cold beer in hand, enjoying the kind of peace you only get after a brutal week at work. The sun was beating down, the water was perfect, and life was good. That's when I heard it, the screech of expensive sneakers on concrete and a voice dripping with entitlement. "Hey, old man, you need to get out, now." I opened one eye to see a teenager standing at the edge of my pool arms, crossed looking at me like I was the hired help who'd forgotten his place. This kid, maybe 17, designer everything, had the kind of smirk that said he'd never heard the word no in his entire life. "This is HOA property," he announced. "My mom runs this neighborhood, so, unless you want problems, I suggest you leave." I almost laughed. If only this entitled brat knew who he was talking to. Before we dive into how this all went down, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there, and if you love stories about entitled people getting what they deserve, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, won't want to miss how this ends. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this absurd situation. 6 months ago, I moved into Willowbrook Estates, one of those picture-perfect suburban neighborhoods where every lawn is manicured within an inch of its life, and the HOA rules are thicker than a phone book. I'd just been elected to a position that required me to relocate to this county, and this place seemed ideal. Quiet, safe, good property value. What I didn't know was that I was moving into a dictatorship disguised as a homeowners association. My first week there, I met Karen Mitchell. She showed up at my door on day 3 with a basket of muffins and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Karen was the kind of woman who wore her authority like designer jewelry, expensive, obvious, and meant to intimidate. Blonde highlights that cost more than most people's car payments, yoga pants that probably had a 3-figure price tag, and an expression that said she was always looking for someone to correct. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she'd said, her voice sugary, sweet. "I'm Karen, the HOA president. Just wanted to make sure you received your welcome packet with all our community guidelines." I had received it, all 47 pages of it. "I noticed your moving truck blocked the Hendersons' driveway for about 20 minutes yesterday," she continued, that smile never wavering. "Just a friendly reminder that we have very strict parking regulations. I'd hate for you to receive a citation on your first week. A citation for a moving truck that was temporarily parked while unloading my entire life." "I'll keep that in mind," I'd said, keeping my tone neutral. Years in my profession had taught me to read people, and I was reading Karen loud and clear. Control freak, power hungry. The type who needed to establish dominance immediately. What I didn't mention to her, what I didn't mention to anyone, was my actual job. I'd learned early in my career that telling people what I did for a living changed how they acted around me. I wanted to be just another neighbor, not someone people felt they had to perform for. So I kept it vague. Public service, I'd say if anyone asked. County work. Technically true. That decision would turn out to be both my biggest mistake and my greatest advantage. Karen's son Brandon I met about a week later. He was 17, drove a BMW. His parents had gifted him for getting a C+ average, and had apparently been raised to believe that rules were suggestions for other people. I first encountered him when his music was rattling my windows at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. I'd gone over, knocked politely, and asked if he could turn it down. Brandon had looked me up and down like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. "Dude, it's not even that late," he'd said, not moving to lower the volume. "Besides, my mom's the HOA president. We can do whatever we want." That phrase, "we can do whatever we want," I'd hear it a lot over the next few months. The thing about the Mitchell family was that they'd weaponized the HOA into their personal enforcement agency. Karen had been president for 3 years, and in that time she'd stacked the board with people who either owed her favors or were too intimidated to challenge her. Every meeting was a performance where Karen decided who was in compliance and who wasn't, based entirely on whether she liked you. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman 3 doors down, had been fined $200 because her garden gnomes violated the aesthetic standards outlined in Section 14.3 of the HOA bylaws. Never mind that those gnomes had been there for 15 years before Karen took power. When Mrs. Patterson tried to protest, Karen threatened daily inspections of her property until she found more violations. The Johnsons, a young couple with a newborn, got cited because their car, a 10-year-old Honda, was deemed unsightly and lowering property values. Karen had actually measured the car's parking position and found it was 3 inches over the designated spot line. 3 inches. The fine was $500. And Brandon was learning from the master. He parked his BMW across 2 spaces regularly. He threw parties that went until dawn. He'd borrowed Mr. Chen's lawnmower without asking and returned it broken, then denied ever touching it. When confronted, Karen would appear like a designer-clad dragon breathing fire about harassment of her family and threatening legal action. The neighborhood lived in fear. I watched it happen. People would see Karen coming and suddenly remember urgent errands. They'd agree to her absurd demands, repainting houses in approved colors, removing basketball hoops, taking down Christmas decorations exactly on January 2nd just to avoid becoming her next target. I tried to stay neutral, keep my head down. My job was demanding enough without neighborhood drama, but I noticed things. The way conversations stopped when Karen walked by. The exhaustion in people's faces when they talked about the latest HOA decree. The quiet resignation of a community that had surrendered to tyranny. I had a few more run-ins with Brandon over those months. He'd rev his engine at 6 in the morning deliberately, it seemed. He'd let his friends park in front of my driveway. Once I came home to find beer cans in my yard from a party that had spilled over from his place. Each time I stayed calm, documented it, made polite requests, but Brandon's attitude got worse. He could sense I wasn't afraid of his mother, and that seemed to enrage him. Most people in this neighborhood trembled at the Mitchell name. I didn't. That made me a problem. Karen tried different tactics with me. Surprise inspections where she'd show up with a clipboard searching for violations. Letters about my grass being a quarter-inch too long. Complaints about my truck, the vehicle I used for work, being commercial in nature and therefore banned under HOA rules. I complied when the rules were legitimate, ignored her when they weren't. And I never not once told her what I actually did for a living. That restraint would prove very valuable. By month 6, I'd seen enough. The Mitchells weren't just annoying, they were operating what amounted to a protection racket. Comply with Karen's whims or face endless harassment and fines. Let Brandon do whatever he wanted, or Karen would find a way to make your life miserable. What they didn't know was that I'd been collecting evidence the whole time. Photos, videos, documented incidents, witness statements that people gave me privately too afraid to speak publicly. I wasn't just a neighbor anymore. I was building a case. And then came that Saturday. That beautiful, peaceful Saturday when Brandon decided to escalate from nuisance to direct confrontation. When he stood at my pool, on my property, and ordered me to leave. That's when I knew it was time to stop being quiet. So there I was, still floating in my pool, looking up at this kid who genuinely believed he had authority over me. Brandon Mitchell stood there in his $200 sneakers, smirking like he'd just delivered a devastating blow. "I'm not leaving," I said calmly, taking another sip of my beer. "Because this is my property, my pool, my house." Brandon's smirk faltered for half a second before returning even stronger. "No, it's not. This whole section is HOA community property." My mom showed me the maps. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh that echoed across the water. "Son, I don't know what maps your mother showed you, but I've got the property deed that says otherwise. This is private property. You're trespassing." His face flushed red. Brandon wasn't used to people standing up to him, and certainly not with laughter. "You're lying." My mom said. "Your mom is wrong," I interrupted, still maintaining that calm tone. Years of dealing with difficult people had taught me that staying cool was the best way to make someone lose theirs. "Now I'm going to ask you nicely one time, please leave my property." "You can't tell me what to do." Brandon's voice cracked slightly, that teenage fury breaking through. "Do you know who my family is? We run this place." I paddled to the edge of the pool, set down my beer, and looked him straight in the eye. "I know exactly who your family is, and I'm still telling you to leave. Right now." For a moment I thought he might actually listen. His bravado wavered and something like uncertainty flickered across his face. But then his phone was out and he was jabbing at the screen with urgent fingers. "You're done," he hissed. "My mom is going to destroy you." "I'll wait," I said, settling back into the water. Karen arrived in less than 5 minutes, which told me she'd been close by, probably doing her weekend patrol of the neighborhood looking for violations to cite. She came through my side gate like a hurricane in Lululemon, her face already set in that expression of righteous fury I'd seen her deploy on so many neighbors. "What is going on here?" she demanded, not to Brandon but to me, as if I was the problem. "Your son trespassed on my property and ordered me to leave my own pool," I explained, still floating, still calm. "I've asked him to leave. Now I'm asking you both to leave." Karen's eyes narrowed. She pulled out her phone, these people and their phones, and started scrolling through something. According to the HOA property maps, this area is designated as community recreational space. "You're actually the one trespassing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was doubling down on the lie. "Karen, you and I both know that's not true. I have the property deed, the survey, the permits. This is private property." It's been private property since the house was built. I don't care what fake documents you have, she snapped, her voice taking on that sharp edge that had cowed so many of our neighbors. The HOA owns this land. I have the documentation right here. She thrust her phone at me, showing what appeared to be some kind of property map. I didn't even need to look closely to know it was fabricated. The boundaries were wrong, the lot numbers didn't match, and most tellingly, it looked like it had been made in Microsoft Paint. That's not a legal document, I said. It's an official HOA record, Karen declared, as if saying it with enough conviction would make it true. And as president, I'm informing you that you're in violation of multiple bylaws. Unauthorized use of community property, harassment of community members. She gestured to Brandon, who was now recording this entire exchange on his phone, and failure to comply with HOA directives. Neighbors were starting to appear. I could see curtains moving, doors cracking open. Mrs. Patterson was on her porch wringing her hands. The Johnsons were watching from their window. Everyone wanted to see what was happening, but no one wanted to get involved. They'd learned that lesson already. The fines alone will be substantial. Karen continued, warming to her performance. I'm talking thousands of dollars. Plus, I'll be recommending to the board that we pursue legal action to have you removed from the community entirely. For using my own pool, I said flatly. For violating community standards and showing complete disregard for our rules. Brandon was grinning, now filming everything, probably already planning how he'd edit this for his social media. This is going viral, dude. Everyone's gonna see what happens when you mess with us. I looked at Karen, then at Brandon, then at the neighbors, watching from their houses, too afraid to speak up. This had gone on long enough. Not just today, but for months. Years, really. This whole neighborhood had been held hostage by these two, and everyone was too scared to do anything about it. Karen, I said, climbing out of the pool and reaching for my towel, I'm going to give you one last chance. Take your son and leave my property. Now. She laughed. Actually laughed. Or what you'll call the police. Please do. I'd love to explain to them how you're illegally occupying community property and threatening HOA leadership. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm asking you to leave. We're not going anywhere. Brandon chimed in, still recording. This is our neighborhood. You're nobody. Karen nodded, crossing her arms. That's right. You moved here 6 months ago thinking you could ignore our rules, avoid our fees, do whatever you want. Well, that's not how Willowbrook Estates works. We have standards. We have order. And people who don't comply face consequences. Consequences, I repeated. Serious consequences, Karen emphasized. I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting for Monday night. We're going to discuss your multiple violations and what actions need to be taken. I suggest you attend, though frankly the decision is already made. She turned to leave Brandon, following her, still filming me, standing there in my swim trunks, dripping water on my own patio. Oh, and one more thing, Karen called over her shoulder. That truck of yours, the one you park in your driveway, I'm having it towed tomorrow. Commercial vehicles are strictly prohibited, and I've been far too lenient with you already. They walked away, Brandon's laughter echoing back to me. I stood there watching them go, watching my neighbors quickly disappear back into their houses, not wanting to be seen associating with Karen's latest target. I looked down at my phone, sitting safely in a waterproof case on my patio table. Its recording light was still blinking. I'd captured everything. Consequences, I muttered to myself, a smile slowly spreading across my face. Yeah, Karen, let's talk about consequences. That evening, after Karen and Brandon left, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door. She was 72, lived alone since her husband died, and I'd watched her shrink into herself every time Karen drove past. Now she stood on my porch, trembling slightly, holding a casserole dish like a shield. I saw what happened, she said quietly. May I come in? Over the next 2 hours, Mrs. Patterson told me everything, not just about her own experiences, but about the entire neighborhood's 3-year nightmare under Karen's rule. The garden gnome incident I'd heard about, that was just the beginning. Karen had fined Mrs. Patterson repeatedly for various violations. Her mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Her doormat was 2 inches too large. Her porch light was too bright. The fines totaled over $3,000. Mrs. Patterson was living on Social Security. Those fines had forced her to skip medications. I thought about moving, she said, tears welling up. But I've lived here for 30 years. My husband and I raised our children here. Why should I be driven out by that woman? You shouldn't, I said firmly. But what can I do? She controls everything. The board just does whatever she says. I tried to fight one fine and she tripled it, said I was disrespecting HOA authority. After Mrs. Patterson left, I couldn't sleep. I sat up reviewing everything I'd documented about the Mitchells and I realized this was bigger than just annoying neighbors. This was systematic harassment, possibly fraud, definitely abuse of power. Sunday morning, Tom Johnson stopped me while I was getting my newspaper. "Hey, I heard about yesterday," he said, glancing around nervously like Karen might materialize from thin air. "Listen, man, just be careful. The Mitchells, they're vindictive. When we first moved in, our car got keyed 3 times in 2 weeks. We couldn't prove it was Brandon, but it stopped after we paid a fine to Karen." "That's extortion," I said. Tom shrugged helplessly. "Probably. But what are we going to do? We've got a baby, a mortgage. We can't afford legal fees to fight the HOA, and Karen knows that. She targets people who can't fight back." Over the next few days, more neighbors came forward, speaking in hushed voices, always checking over their shoulders. Each had a story. The Chens told me about how Brandon had borrowed their lawnmower, broken it, then Karen had cited them for having an improperly maintained lawn. When they explained their mower was broken by her son, she'd threatened them with daily inspections. The Rodriguezes described how their teenage daughter had rejected Brandon's advances at school. The next week, their house was egged. Security footage clearly showed Brandon's BMW, but when they went to Karen, she'd threatened to sue them for defamation. Marcus Webb, a single father of 2, told me about coming home to find his fence vandalized with spray paint. Karen had immediately fined him for the eyesore and demanded he repaint it within 48 hours at his expense. He'd seen Brandon and his friends laughing in their yard that night, but had no way to prove it. "She's untouchable," Marcus said bitterly. "Her brother-in-law is a lawyer who sends threatening letters to anyone who challenges her. Her husband donates to local politicians. She's got connections everywhere." I listened to all of it, documented all of it, and felt my anger growing into something cold and focused. The week after the pool incident, Brandon escalated. Monday evening, I came home to find him and 3 friends in my backyard peering through my fence at the pool. "Can I help you?" I called out. "Just checking out the community property," Brandon sneered, "making sure everything's up to code." Tuesday, he drove past my house at least a dozen times, revving his engine, laying on the horn. When I was trying to work from home, the noise was constant. I called him, asked him politely to stop. He laughed and hung up. Wednesday, I found trash dumped on my lawn. Fast food bags, soda cups, cigarette butts. My security camera caught Brandon's BMW driving away at 3 in the morning. Thursday, someone I had a pretty good guess who slashed 2 of my truck tires while I was at work. Every incident I documented. Photos, videos, timestamps. I was building something bigger than just a defense against HOA harassment, but I needed more. I needed the final piece that would make this case undeniable. Friday, I had to work late. A major situation required my attention, and I didn't get home until almost midnight. That's when I saw it. My pool area looked like a war zone. Beer bottles floated in the water. Pizza boxes were scattered across the deck. Someone had vomited in my flower beds. My patio furniture was overturned, and my expensive grill had been pushed into the pool. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, my neighbors had watched it happen and done nothing. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson said when I knocked on her door, barely containing my fury. They showed up around 6. Brandon and at least 20 kids. They were so loud, so destructive. I called Karen, but she just laughed and said boys will be boys. I wanted to call the police, but what?" She looked down. "Karen told everyone that if anyone called the police on her son, she'd make our lives hell. She'd find violations for everyone who dared. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stood there on Mrs. Patterson's porch looking at this elderly woman who'd been terrorized into helplessness, and something in me snapped. Not in anger, in clarity. These people needed someone who couldn't be threatened. Someone who couldn't be bullied or intimidated. Someone with actual authority that superseded Karen's manufactured power. "Mrs. Patterson," I said calmly, "how would you feel about testifying to what you just told me? I couldn't. Karen would. What if I told you that Karen can't touch you, that none of her threats mean anything? How could you possibly guarantee